Hey everyone, welcome back. Sounds like you've been digging into some really fascinating stuff on leadership and management. Definitely a smart move because, understanding these dynamics, it can really be a game changer in any situation, right? Whether you're leading a team at work or just navigating your own day-to-day life, it's all connected.
It really is. You know what's interesting is how the very definition of performance is shifting. We're moving beyond just fixating on, those profits and embracing a more holistic perspective, I guess you could say.
So are you saying it's not just about the bottom line anymore? That's kind of refreshing to hear, actually.
It is. There's a growing emphasis on what's called the triple bottom line, which basically means considering the social and environmental impacts of decisions right alongside those economic factors, recognizing that they're all interconnected.
Yeah, getting that. So it's kind of like seeing the bigger picture, the ripple effect of our actions, not just the immediate profit margin.
Exactly. Think of it like this. Even in your day-to-day work, considering the broader impact of your decisions, both environmentally and socially, it can really set you apart.
Could you give me an example of what this triple bottom line looks like in action, like a real world example?
Sure. Take IBM, for example. They've made a pretty serious commitment to environmental sustainability, right? They're reducing their carbon footprint, investing in renewable energy sources, and really understanding that environmental performance, well, it isn't just good for the planet, it can actually boost their economic performance too.
Interesting. So it's like a win-win situation. They're doing good for the environment and reaping the benefits financially as well.
Exactly. They're seeing cost savings, attracting more environmentally conscious clients. It all ties together.
It does. That's a really great example. It shows that even on an individual level, just considering the broader impact of our choices can make a tangible difference. So we've talked about performance in a broad sense, but what about individual performance? Like, how do our own personalities factor into our leadership potential?
That's where things get really fascinating. Understanding your own personality and how those traits interact with the people you work with, well, that can be a game changer. Ever heard of the Big Five personality
I've
traits?
heard of it, yeah, but maybe you could give us a quick rundown.
Sure, it's openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. They're a great starting point for understanding yourself and others.
Okay, that makes sense. But when we talk about leadership, there's this, I don't know, maybe misconception that you have to be super extroverted to succeed. What about those of us who are, a bit more introverted? How can we leverage our strengths in leadership roles?
That's such a good point. It's easy to fall into that trap of thinking there's only one way to be a good leader. Introversion and extroversion, they're just two ends of a spectrum. Effective leadership isn't limited to one type. In fact, introverts can make amazing leaders. They're often incredible listeners, they consider different perspectives really deeply, and they often create a space for thoughtful, decision making, which is so valuable.
That is really reassuring to hear. So it's not about trying to fit into this one mold, but rather about understanding and then leveraging those natural inclinations we already have.
Exactly. And speaking of natural inclinations, it's not just our personality traits that come into play, right? There's also emotional intelligence, or EQ.
Yeah, EQ. Something we hear a lot about these days, but sometimes I think it's misunderstood. Can you tell us more about what EQ really means?
Definitely. EQ is often mistaken for just being nice all the time, but it's so much deeper than that. It's about understanding and managing your own emotions, but also, and this is key, being really perceptive about what others are feeling. It's about empathy, self-awareness, and building those genuine, strong, meaningful relationships with the people around you.
So being able to, I guess, read the room, pick up on those emotional cues, that makes sense. Could you maybe elaborate a bit more about how the different aspects of EQ actually come into play in a leadership role?
Absolutely. Daniel Goleman, a real pioneer in the field of EQ, he breaks it down into four key aspects: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and finally, relationship management.
Four aspects. Got it.
Right. Self-awareness is really about understanding your own emotions and how they impact your thoughts and your actions. Then you have self-management, which kind of builds on that by helping you control those impulses and act with intention.
So it's that whole idea of being mindful, being present, not just reacting impulsively to every situation.
Exactly. Then we have social awareness, which is the ability to, you were talking about this, right? To understand the emotions of others and respond with empathy. And then finally, all of that comes together with relationship management, which is, as it sounds, building strong, healthy relationships.
It's like putting all the pieces together. So we've got different personalities, we've got these varying levels of EQ. How does this all play out in terms of, actual leadership styles? Because there's
Yeah.
got to be more than one way to be a leader, right?
You're absolutely right. There's a whole bunch of different leadership styles out there, and each one has its own, pros and cons, its own advantages and disadvantages. You've got your task-oriented leaders, those who are like laser focused on efficiency, on checking things off that to-do
Like
list.
those who love a good plan and sticking to it.
Exactly. Then you've got your people-oriented leaders who are really all about those positive relationships and creating a supportive, encouraging environment where everyone feels valued.
Those are the ones who make you feel seen and heard,
Yeah.
right? Who really invest in their team members.
Exactly. And of course, you've got the more, I guess you could call them classic leadership styles, like authoritarian leadership, where the leader makes all the decisions, and then you have democratic leadership, which is much more collaborative, lots of group decision making there. And then, of course, there's the laissez-faire approach, where leaders kind of take a step back and trust their team to manage their own work.
So it's like a spectrum from very hands-on to more hands-off. That's quite a range of styles. It makes you wonder, is there a single best leadership style to adopt? Or is it more about the situation?
That's the thing.
Mm.
There's no magic formula here, right? No one-size-fits-all approach. The most effective style really depends on the specific situation, the team dynamics, the goals you're working towards. It's all about context.
So adaptability is key. Being able to read the room, so to speak, and adjust your approach as needed.
Exactly. And it's not just about you as the leader, but also about your relationship with your team. That's where this idea of, have you heard of leader-member exchange theory, sometimes called LMX theory?
LMX theory. Not really. Give me the rundown. What is it and why is it so important?
Okay, so LMX theory basically zooms in on the quality of the relationship between, leaders and each individual team member. It suggests that leaders kind of naturally develop different types of relationships with different people on their team, which makes sense, right?
Absolutely. We connect with some people on a deeper level than others.
Exactly. So some relationships are more what we call in-group, marked by higher levels of trust, a lot of mutual support, very open communication. While others might be more, we call them out-group, which is characterized by more formal interactions, maybe a bit less personal connection. It's not about playing favorites, it's just the natural dynamics that develop.
That makes sense.
Yep.
I can definitely see how that plays out in real life. I've had bosses where I felt like I could go to them with anything and others where it was much more strictly business. I'm curious, how does the quality of these relationships, these in-group versus out-group dynamics, how do they actually impact performance?
It has a bigger impact than you might think. Research consistently shows that high-quality LMX relationships, those with a lot of trust and open communication, they usually lead to, are you ready for this? Better team performance, higher job satisfaction, and even lower turnover rates.
Wow, so it's not just about feeling good, it's about tangible results.
Exactly. Creating a positive and supportive work environment, it's more than just being a good boss. It's about building those genuine high-trust relationships. And you know what often makes the difference in building those connections?
What's that?
Communication. Effective communication. But even more powerful than that, storytelling.
Storytelling. That's a fascinating concept to apply to leadership, don't you think? I mean, how does that work?
It's incredibly powerful. Think about it this way. Some of the most effective leaders throughout history have also been amazing storytellers. They really understand how to use narratives to shape the culture of their organization, to inspire the people around them, to get people motivated to act.
Right, like a good story can really draw you in and make you feel invested.
Yeah.
So are you saying a good CEO is, in essence, like a corporate bard?
Mm.
I kind of love that. But
Yeah.
seriously, why are stories so important in a business setting?
Because stories have this amazing power to create meaning and connect people around a shared purpose. They tap into our emotions in a way that facts and figures sometimes can't.
It's like, think about those companies with really strong cultures, where everyone seems to be on the same page. I feel like they often have a good story behind them, something that resonates with people.
Exactly. And that shared understanding, that sense of purpose, it can really make a difference.
It's like that feeling you get when you're really engrossed in a good movie. You're invested in the characters, in their journey.
Exactly. Effective leaders, they really try to create that same feeling within their teams. They want to inspire that level of shared purpose, that feeling of being part of something bigger than themselves. And they do that in part through this art of storytelling. It's fascinating.
It really is. So we've established that storytelling, it's crucial, but how does it tie into a leader's overall, like, vision and mission? A lot of times those things end up feeling like corporate documents that kind of get filed away and rarely revisited. How do we move beyond that?
That's where visionary leadership really comes in. It's
Yeah.
about moving beyond those, as you said, generic mission statements and really painting a vivid picture of the future you're working towards, a future that people can get excited about.
So less about the what and more about the why.
Exactly. Think about someone like Indra Nooyi, the former CEO of PepsiCo. She was a true visionary leader. She didn't just focus on short-term profits. She had this bigger vision for PepsiCo, a role in the world that went beyond just selling snacks and beverages. It encompassed sustainability, social responsibility, even meeting those evolving needs of their customers. It was inspiring.
Yeah, I remember Indra Nooyi. She was really known for being an exceptionally strong leader. What do you think set her apart?
Well, for one, she was a master at communicating her vision in a way that just resonated with people. It wasn't just a bunch of corporate jargon, it felt real. She didn't just tell people what to do, she painted a picture of what was possible, and that's what made her so effective.
So it's not just about having a vision, but about being able to convey that vision, to share it in a way that makes other people feel it, believe it, want to be a part of it.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Even with a clear vision, you need a roadmap to get there, right? That's where we get into the practical side of things, the actual planning and execution. That's where strategic planning comes in.
Ah, strategic planning. That term always makes me think of those giant corporations with dedicated strategy teams. Can we, us regular folks, can we actually use strategic planning in our own lives?
Yeah.
Or is it just a big business buzzword?
Absolutely, you can. Strategic planning, it's incredibly valuable for everyone, regardless of your job title or the size of your team. It's about setting yourself up for success no matter what your goals are.
Really, I always imagined it involved these super complex SWOT analyses and like spreadsheets galore. Not really my thing, to be honest.
Well, SWOT analysis, it stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And it is a valuable tool. It's basically a way to take a 360-degree view of your situation. You look at what's going on internally, what's going on externally, and it helps you make more informed decisions.
So it's about being honest with yourself about where you're at, what you're good at, and where you might need to step up your game.
You got it. It's about recognizing your strengths, acknowledging those weaknesses, and then importantly, identifying the opportunities that are out there and being aware of any potential roadblocks that might pop up. It's a holistic assessment.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this could be helpful. It's like once you've done a SWOT analysis, you're not just wandering around in the dark, you have a map.
Exactly. A map to guide your decisions and your actions.
So let's say you've done your SWOT analysis, you have a clear vision for what you want to achieve. What comes next? How do you move from that planning phase to actually, taking action and making things happen?
Well, that's where we can bring in another strategic planning tool. It can be really useful for individuals and organizations, and it's called the balanced scorecard. Have you heard of this one?
The balanced scorecard, yeah. I've definitely heard the term thrown around. It sounds like something they teach in those fancy MBA programs.
Uh-huh. Well, it might be taught in MBA programs, but it's not just for, high-flying executives. The balanced scorecard can be incredibly useful for anyone who wants to set goals and actually achieve them.
So how does it work? Break it down for me.
Okay, so picture this. The balanced scorecard is essentially a framework. It helps you translate that vision you have, your grand plan, into concrete goals and objectives. Think of it as your roadmap to success, but instead of just looking at one aspect, it encourages you to consider performance from 4 key perspectives: financial, customer, internal processes, and learning and growth. It makes sure you're not neglecting any area.
I like that. So it's a more holistic way of, I guess, measuring success, not just fixating on the financial bottom line.
Exactly, because true success, it usually involves more than just money, right? It's about finding that balance across all areas of your life.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Can you give me some examples of what you might actually measure using this balanced scorecard, like to make it more concrete? Because I think a lot of people hear these terms and they're like, oh, okay, but what does that mean for me?
Sure. So the specific metrics, the things you actually track, they'll naturally vary depending on what your individual goals are, your context, your situation. But just to give you a general idea, for the financial perspective, you might track things like your income, your expenses, how much you're saving, maybe a return on investments if you're into that kind of thing.
Okay, that makes sense. So for the customer perspective, which in our personal lives could be our relationships with, I don't know, our family, friends, colleagues, what might we measure there?
Right. For the customer perspective, it's all about thinking, how am I showing up in my relationships? Am I being the kind of friend, partner, colleague that I want to be? You might measure the quality of your interactions,
Mhm.
how well you're meeting their needs, whether you're adding value to their lives. It's about being a good human.
Wow, I've never thought about it like that before, but it makes so much sense. We're all serving someone in a way, even in our personal interactions.
Yeah.
What about internal processes? That one sounds very corporate. Is there a personal development angle to that one too?
You better believe it. Think of internal processes as analyzing your daily habits, your routines, those things you do almost on autopilot. Are your actions aligned with your goals? Are there any bottlenecks, things that are slowing you down, or maybe time-wasting activities that you could eliminate?
Oh, I like that. It's about being more intentional with our time and energy.
Exactly. It's about optimizing your personal processes for maximum effectiveness and making sure that your daily actions are moving you closer to where you want to be, not further away.
It's like fine-tuning a machine for optimal performance, but in this case, it's our own lives. And finally, we have learning and growth. I feel like this one is super important, especially in today's world where everything is changing so quickly.
Absolutely. The learning and growth perspective, it's all about recognizing that you're a work in progress. There's always room for improvement, always something new to discover. What skills have you been wanting to develop? What knowledge gaps would you like to fill? Maybe there's a course you've been meaning to take, a book that's been sitting on your shelf for ages, gathering dust.
Right. It's about investing in ourselves and embracing that growth mindset.
Exactly. And remember, learning doesn't always have to be formal. It doesn't mean you have to go back to school or anything. It can be through your experiences, conversations with interesting people, even failures. Failures are just opportunities in disguise, right? The key is to stay curious, open-minded, and committed to that continuous improvement.
I love that. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We talked about the importance of looking at the triple bottom line, the power of storytelling, these strategic planning tools like the balanced scorecard, which I have to say you've totally demystified for me. It's actually not that intimidating.
Hmm.
It's clear that leadership, it's not just one thing. It's this multifaceted skill set that we can all develop and refine.
That's exactly right. It's a journey, not a destination, right? The more we learn, the more we apply these principles, the more effective and impactful we can be as leaders, not just in our professional lives, but in every aspect of our lives. Welcome back. It seems like you're really intrigued by the strategic side of things, especially that balanced scorecard we were talking about.
Yeah, it really got me thinking. It's more than just a business school buzzword, huh?
You got that right.
Yeah.
It's about taking a step back, from the daily grind and looking at the bigger picture. Remember that dashboard analogy we talked about?
I do, yeah, the dashboard for our goals.
Exactly. It helps make sure we're not neglecting any area of our lives,
Right.
right? Those four perspectives: financial, customer, internal processes, and learning and growth.
Right, it keeps us on track. And speaking of the customer perspective, I'm really curious about how that translates to our personal lives.
It's an interesting one, right? Because in a business context, it's all about customer satisfaction, loyalty. But when we apply it personally, it becomes about, well, how we show up in our relationships.
So instead of focusing on what we're getting out of those relationships, we're thinking about what we're contributing.
You got it. Are we being supportive? Are we good listeners? Are we adding value to the lives of the people we care about?
I love that. It's a good reminder that even in our personal lives, we have something to offer.
Exactly. And that mindset shift, it can make a world of difference. Now, on to those internal processes. That one might sound a bit, I don't know, corporate-y, but trust me, there's a personal development angle here too.
Okay, I'm all ears. Convince me. How do we apply internal processes to our personal growth?
Well, think of it this way. We all have these habits, these routines that we go through every day, right? Almost on autopilot sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. Guilty as charged.
But are those routines actually serving us? Are they helping us move towards our goals? Or are they holding us back?
That's a great question. It's so easy to just go through the motions without really thinking about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So internal processes, it's about taking a close look at those habits and honestly assessing whether they're effective or not. Maybe there are some bottlenecks we can eliminate, time-wasting activities that we can ditch.
So it's about streamlining our lives, making sure our actions are aligned with our aspirations.
You nailed it. It's about working smarter, not harder. Now let's talk about the learning and growth perspective. This one is crucial for anyone on that self-improvement journey.
This is my favorite.
Yeah.
I'm all about learning new things and expanding my horizons. What are some practical ways we can, really put this perspective into action?
Well, it's about embracing that identity of being a lifelong learner, right? Yeah. always seeking out new knowledge, new skills. What have you been wanting to learn? Is there a course you've been eyeing? A book you've been meaning to read?
Oh, so many books. The never-ending to-read list.
I hear you. But remember, learning, it's not just about formal education. It can be through experiences, conversations, even our
Right.
mistakes.
Those aha moments that often come from unexpected places.
Exactly. The key is to stay curious, stay open to new possibilities, and don't be afraid to step outside of that comfort zone. Now, we've talked about the balanced scorecard, how it can help us set those goals and, importantly, track our progress.
Hmm.
But what about when those inevitable roadblocks pop up? Because change can be tough.
Oh, yeah. Change can be really challenging. We set these great goals. We have the best of intentions, but then life happens.
It does, but don't worry, there are frameworks for that too.
Yeah.
Remember Lewin's three-stage model of change:
Refresh my memory.
unfreezing, changing, and refreezing.
Right. It's like preparing for a shift, navigating the transition, and then making that change stick.
You got it. The unfreezing stage, it's all about preparing ourselves or our teams, if we're talking about organizations, mentally preparing for the change. Why is this change important? What are we hoping to achieve? Addressing those concerns, really getting everyone on board.
So it's about communication, making sure everyone understands the why behind the change.
Exactly. Because if people don't understand why we're doing something differently, they're much less likely to embrace it.
That makes a lot of sense. So once we've unfrozen, then we move into the changing stage, right? What does that look like in practice?
Well, that's where the rubber meets the road, right? It's
Yeah.
where the actual implementation happens. Providing clear expectations, offering support along the way, and I think this is important, celebrating those small wins. Because those little victories, they can be super motivating.
They really can. It's a reminder that we're making progress, even if it's one step at a time.
Exactly. And then finally, we reach that refreezing stage. This is all about making the change stick, making it part of, our new normal, whether it's a new habit or a new way of doing things. And one effective way to do this is by aligning the change with our reward systems.
Interesting. So are you saying we should be rewarding ourselves for making positive changes?
Exactly. Whether it's acknowledging a team member's effort to embrace a new process or rewarding ourselves for sticking to a new habit, that positive reinforcement, it can be a really powerful motivator.
I like it. It's like that old saying, what gets rewarded gets repeated.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the balanced scorecard, Lewin's change model. What about organizational culture? How does that fit into the picture?
Ah, that's a great question because culture is huge. Even the most brilliant, the most well thought out strategy, it's going to fall flat if it doesn't align with the organization's culture.
So it's kind of like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Exactly. You can't force it. It just won't work.
So how can leaders ensure that their, strategic vision is aligned with the culture of their organization?
Well, it starts with understanding the culture. What are those shared values? What are the beliefs? What are the behaviors that make the organization tick? What makes it unique?
It's about really listening to the heartbeat of the organization, right?
Right.
Understanding its DNA, its essence.
Beautifully said. And once you have a good grasp of the culture, then you can start to craft a strategy that resonates, with those core principles.
It's about finding that sweet spot where the strategy feels both ambitious, but also achievable. Challenging, definitely, but aligned with the soul of the organization.
Exactly. It's like finding that perfect harmony. And it's an ongoing process. It's about constantly listening, adapting, and refining things along the way.
So aligning strategy and culture, that's essential. Got it. Are there any other, common pitfalls that leaders should watch out for when it comes to strategic planning and execution?
One of the biggest points of confusion I often see is the distinction between strategy and tactics. People use them interchangeably, but they're not the same thing.
Oh, I've totally been guilty of that myself.
Yeah.
Can you clarify the difference for us? Because I think it's an important one.
Absolutely. Think of your strategy as your overall plan. It's the big picture. It outlines how you're going to achieve those big long-term goals. Tactics, on the other hand, they're the specific actions you take to actually bring that strategy to life. They're the nitty-gritty, the step-by-step, what you're doing on a daily or weekly basis to move yourself closer to those objectives.
Okay, that makes sense. So strategy is the what, and tactics are the how.
You get it. Think of it this way. If your strategy is to become, let's say, the leading provider of, I don't know, eco-friendly clothing in your region, your tactics would be the specific steps to achieve that. So maybe sourcing sustainable materials, partnering with environmental organizations, getting the word out with a targeted marketing campaign, that kind of thing.
Okay, that's a really helpful way to think about it. So before you even start thinking about the how, you need to get clear on the what.
Precisely. Otherwise, you risk heading off in the wrong direction completely. It's like setting off on a journey without knowing your destination. You might end up somewhere, but it might not be where you want to be.
That's a great analogy. So we define our strategy, we outline those tactics. What's next?
Communication.
Yeah.
Communication is key. You can have the most brilliant strategy in the world, but if you don't communicate it effectively to your team, if you don't get them on board, it's not going to get very far.
Right. It's about bringing people along on the journey with you, not just telling them what to do, but explaining the why, getting them excited about the vision.
Exactly. And remember, effective communication, it's not just about, blasting out information. It's about engaging your team, inspiring them to embrace the vision, empowering them to do their best work. It's about creating that sense of shared purpose,
Right.
that feeling that we're all in this together.
And to bring it full circle, storytelling can be a powerful tool for doing that right.
Absolutely. Because stories, they have this amazing ability to transcend those, hierarchical barriers. They can connect with people on an emotional level, make everyone feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves.
This has been so insightful. We've covered a lot of ground here. Strategic planning, aligning it with culture, embracing creativity, being adaptable, and of course, mastering the art of communication. It's clear that strategic planning, it's not just about spreadsheets and charts. It's about people.
It really is. And ultimately, it's about creating a better future, both for ourselves and for our organizations.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So where do we go from here? What's next on our deep dive adventure?
Well, we've journeyed from the personal to the organizational. Now let's broaden our horizons even further. Let's explore leadership on a global stage.
Welcome back, everyone. So we've journeyed from the personal to the organizational, and now we're going global. It's fascinating to think about how interconnected our world have become, which means being able to lead across cultures, it's not just a nice-to-have skill anymore, it's essential, right?
It really is. It's like those borders are fading away, and we're all part of this massive global team. And you're absolutely right. Understanding those cultural differences, it's crucial for success in today's world.
Totally. So where do we even begin to unpack all of that? Because global leadership, it's a whole other level of complexity.
It is. Well, one of the most influential frameworks out there, I think, for understanding cultural differences is Geert Hofstede's cultural dimensions theory. He identified 6 key dimensions that can really help us, decode how cultures vary.
Okay, 6 dimensions. Now I'm really intrigued.
Yeah.
Break it down for me. What are they?
All right, so first up, we've got power distance, which basically describes how comfortable people are with, unequal power distribution. So in high power distance cultures, you'll often see there's really strong hierarchies, a lot of deference to authority.
Right. So like in those cultures, you wouldn't really feel comfortable, I don't know, casually questioning your boss or calling them by their first name.
Exactly. There's a very clear line between those in authority and those who are not. Now, the next dimension is individualism versus collectivism. So individualistic cultures, it's all about those individual goals, individual achievements. Whereas in collectivist cultures, they prioritize harmony, interdependence, and that shared responsibility.
It's that classic tension between like the lone wolf and the team player.
Right.
Two very different approaches.
A perfect analogy. Okay, so the next one, it's called masculinity versus femininity, but it's not really about gender roles, more about the values that a culture prioritizes. So masculine cultures, they tend to value things like ambition, assertiveness, material success. Feminine cultures, however, place a higher importance on, collaboration, nurturing those relationships, and overall quality of life.
So it's more about what's considered important, how a culture defines success.
Exactly. Now, the next dimension is uncertainty avoidance, which is basically how much a culture tolerates ambiguity and risk. So, high uncertainty avoidance cultures, they crave predictability, they want structure, they like those clear rules, thorough planning, minimize the unknowns as much as possible.
Whereas low uncertainty avoidance cultures are more, I don't know, go with the flow, embrace the unknown.
Exactly. They're more comfortable with change, adaptability, taking risks. They don't need everything to be planned out perfectly in advance. All right, next up we have long-term orientation versus short-term orientation. This one is all about, time perspective. Long-term oriented cultures, they take that long view, perseverance, thrift, planning for the future, that's their jam.
Got it. So like delaying gratification for something bigger down the line.
Exactly. Now, Short-term oriented cultures, they tend to focus more on the present moment, valuing traditions, immediate gratification, fulfilling social obligations.
So it's really about whether a culture is more future-focused or present-focused. Fascinating.
Yeah.
What's the last dimension?
Okay, last but not least, we have indulgence versus restraint, which is all about, well, how much a culture allows for the gratification of those basic human desires,
Hmm.
right? Indulgent cultures, they're more expressive. They value things like enjoyment, leisure time, having fun.
Sounds like my kind of culture. Life's too short to be serious all the time.
I hear you. But on the flip side, restrained cultures, they have stricter social norms and really emphasize self-control and moderation. They're a bit more, shall we say, buttoned up.
Okay, that makes sense. So finding that balance between, enjoying life and adhering to those social expectations.
Exactly. It's a balancing act for sure. And remember, these dimensions, they exist on a spectrum, right? It's not like cultures fall neatly into one category or the other. It's more nuanced than that.
Right. It's all about those shades of gray, the complexities that make each culture unique.
Precisely. And that's what makes it so fascinating, but also challenging, of course, when you're trying to lead across those differences.
Absolutely. But these dimensions, they're really insightful. I can see how understanding them could be a game changer when it comes to bridging those cultural differences. But I have to admit, it seems like a lot to keep track of. Any practical tips for actually applying these dimensions to real-world situations?
Of course. The key is to use this framework as a starting point. So, for example, let's say you're leading a team and you've got members from, I don't know, the United States and Japan. Knowing that the U.S. leans towards individualism, while Japan places a high value on collectivism, that can help you tailor your communication, your leadership style, make everyone feel seen and heard.
So like with the U.S. team members, you might emphasize individual contributions, maybe give them more autonomy.
Yeah.
With the Japanese team members, you might focus on team cohesion, that shared success.
Exactly. It's about understanding those subtle differences and adjusting your approach so that you're resonating with everyone, regardless of their cultural background. Sensitivity is key.
It really is. Are there any other, models or frameworks that could be helpful when we're navigating the, let's face it, often tricky waters of global leadership?
Definitely. There's the GLOBE study, which stands for Global Leadership and Organizational Behavior Effectiveness. It's a really interesting one because it builds on Hofstede's work, but it identifies 9 cultural dimensions, some of which are specifically about leadership.
Okay, 9 dimensions. Tell me more. I'm all ears.
Well, in addition to the 6 we already talked about from Hofstede's theory, the GLOBE study also includes performance orientation, assertiveness, and humane orientation.
Okay, and what do those mean? Break those down for me.
So performance orientation is pretty much what it sounds like. It's about how much a culture values like excellence and achievement, how much they reward those things.
Got it. Some cultures are very driven by results, while others are a bit more laid back.
Exactly. And then we have assertiveness, which refers to how direct people are in their communication, how confrontational they are.
So some cultures are very straight-talking, while others are more about diplomacy and saving face.
Exactly. It's about understanding those communication styles and, again, adapting your own accordingly. And then finally, we have humane orientation, which is all about compassion, fairness, caring for others. It's about how much a culture values those qualities.
So a culture that prioritizes the well-being of its people.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that the GLOBE study, it also delves into how different leadership styles, are perceived and how effective they are in various cultures.
Oh, that's fascinating. Because I imagine what might be considered a really effective leadership style in one culture might fall completely flat in another.
You're exactly right. So, for example, while charismatic leadership tends to be universally valued, at least to some extent, the specific behaviors that are associated with charisma, those can differ drastically across cultures.
So like a charismatic leader in, say, a Latin American culture might be very expressive, very animated, while in a culture like, I don't know, Japan, a more reserved, understated approach might be more effective.
Exactly. Again, it all comes down to cultural nuances and being able to adapt your approach accordingly. It's almost like we're developing a whole new language, the language of cross-cultural leadership.
I love that analogy. It really is like learning a new language with all its subtleties and nuances.
Mm-hmm.
So as we're wrapping up here, what are some practical steps that we can take
Yeah.
to, become more fluent in this language of cross-cultural leadership? What can we do to enhance our skills in this area?
Well, one of the most valuable skills you can develop is cultural intelligence, sometimes called CQ.
CQ. So like EQ, but for cultures.
You could say that. CQ is all about being able to effectively navigate culturally diverse situations. It's about having that knowledge of different cultures, but also being really self-aware of your own cultural biases.
Mm.
And importantly, being able to adapt your behavior and communication style as needed.
So recognizing that we all see the world through a certain cultural lens, and that lens, it's probably going to be different from the person standing next to us.
You got it. And instead of judging those differences, we need to be curious about them, be adaptable, be respectful.
It's about embracing that diversity, seeing it as a strength, not a weakness.
Yeah.
And on that note, any final thoughts before we wrap up this deep dive?
Just one. Leadership, it's not something you're born with. It's not some, magical quality that some people have and others don't. It's a skill. It's something we can all cultivate. We can develop it, refine it throughout our lives. It's a journey.
It's that growth mindset in action, believing that we can always learn and grow and become better versions of ourselves, no matter what stage of life we're in.
Exactly. And as our world becomes increasingly interconnected, I really believe that this ability to lead across cultures, to bridge those divides, to find that common ground, it's going to be essential for creating a more harmonious and more prosperous future for everyone.
What a wonderful thought to end on. This has been such an inspiring and insightful conversation. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the ever-evolving world of leadership and management. Until next time.